Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome. My name is Keto Pilek. I am the education coordinator with Keep Growing Detroit, amongst other things. And I have here with me today Miss Rosebud Schneider, who is one of our farmers at the KGD farm. And I'll let her talk a little bit about her background, but really happy to have her out teaching a class with us today. So we got some good information to share with you on container gardening today. Things to consider, plants that do better than others, sizes of pots, soil mix, the whole conversation. But definitely want to encourage you guys to ask questions as we're going along. I will be kind of managing those and making sure Rosebud gets to your questions and we answer everybody's and get the good information out there. So with that, I guess let's go ahead and give Rosebud a warm welcome and take it away.
Thanks, everybody. Good evening. My name is Rosebud Schneider. Thanks, Keto, for asking me to be on Zoom with you all today and share some knowledge about container gardening. A little bit about me. I grew up in Southwest Detroit. I've lived in Detroit and Metro Detroit my entire life. The last 3 years I've lived up north. I was farming on a tribal farm up there. But now I'm back in the city and I'm super, super glad to be home. It was nice to ride the pandemic out up there, but I'm happy to be home and with Keep Growing Detroit now. So I've been, gardening pretty much my entire life. Like I have early memories of, always having gardens where we lived. And my grandma always had things growing in really random areas, pots all over her yard and in her house. So that's always been like, just in the background of of my life. I've been like farming for the last 6 years, and that started off at American Indian Health and Family Services, where we had a seed saving garden and just a small vegetable garden in the space that we work there. And there we did some container gardening as well. So I do have some experience. Hi, my husband's leaving for work, sorry. So I do have some experience around that. But I love growing. I love learning new techniques. That's why I'm a farmer. I love everything about it, and there's always something to learn. So again, thank you for having me here. I'm excited to have a discussion about container gardening. I would love to learn this. This is a space that no one is an expert. We're all experts. So we all have life experience, and definitely, so there, we all have something to lend to the conversation. So I just want to welcome you all to drop things in the chat, or just raise your hand and we'll go from there. But right now I'm gonna start sharing my screen unless you have anything else, Keto, before we get started.
That's good. Let's go for it.
All right. Okay. Okay, I hope everybody can see the screen. If not, let us know. But yes, today we're here. We're going to talk about container gardening, growing vegetables in containers. What does that mean? What does that mean to you? What is container gardening? Container gardening is exactly what it says, growing your vegetables or your plants exclusively in containers and not in the ground. There are tons of reasons to use containers. I would love to hear if any folks are growing in containers. Maybe you can, raise your hand or react so we can see who's using containers. Yeah, but there are lots of reasons. One of the big reasons that I always hear and that we've dealt with is limited space, not having actual ground to grow in, and wanting to reuse containers, in different ways. Sometimes, especially in the city, contaminated soil is a really big issue. So that would be another reason to do that. So you're controlling what soil you're using. The convenience of, where your containers go. You can get really creative and have them all over your porch or have them all over your yard and, get a little artistic with it sometimes. I've seen some really cool balconies and porches with lots of containers all over and all kinds of things being grown. Another really big thing that happens sometimes is late, people get a late start in their season. Like now, first of all, I've just moved into this house and I'm not really prepared to grow a garden or get anything started. So I do have some pots already out in my back on my deck that I've started some things into. But I'm super late because all my energy goes to the farm. And when I come home, I don't really want to do anything else. The other really great thing about container gardening, especially if you're, in a community setting, working with young folks or elderly folks with mobility issues, container gardening makes things really accessible. And that's really great. And then you don't have to have, heavy equipment or, a ton of things that makes it, again, that gets in the way of access to growing your plants. Another really good thing that people do is, they will plant invasive plants like mint or things like that to help spread that growth. If you've planted mint or things like that, it spreads all over the place. But growing it in a pot helps control that, and you'll always have mint because it is a perennial and it will come back. Another really good reason to plant in containers is eliminate or decrease weeds. I would not say that you will completely eliminate weeds. Weeds happen, but you could definitely decrease them by growing in containers, depending on what you're growing. And less risk of soil-borne diseases as well. And then I mentioned it before, but container scaping is another fancy way of, convenience of, moving your containers around. You can make arrangements, you can make, get artistic with it. Can anyone think of any containers that I didn't mention? Any? No?
Any benefits to containers?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how about anybody from the group? Do you guys have any ideas about anything else that were benefits other than the things that Rosebud had already mentioned? Okay.
All right. Can anyone think of some disadvantages, reasons why maybe a container garden wouldn't work for you? No? Yes? Is this thing on? Just kidding. All right. So some disadvantages of containers, keeping plants watered consistently. I have definitely run into that. I've grown tomatoes in buckets before, in 5-gallon buckets. And while that's a really cool idea and it works, getting consistent water is always an issue, especially with tomatoes. What else? Keeping up with fertility needs. So,
So
feeding
there
those.
was a comment in the chat.
Uh-huh.
So Diana, maybe you could clarify, you're saying growing, like they can be smaller. Are you saying like the plants are stunted or?
Yeah, you know how things like lemon trees or something, they can grow really big, but if you do it in a container, some plants, they don't grow as wild or tall, or I guess depending on what you're growing.
Yeah. I think that's, there's some truth to that for sure, that limits the amount of the ability of some plants to grow based on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, sure. And we will talk about root systems and things like that, because some plants need a lot of space. And we'll get to that point. So keeping up with fertility needs, feeding that plant, making sure it gets the nutrients that it does need. Sometimes that could be a disadvantage in containers. And then limitations in what can grow and how much you can get. So I think, Diana, that's probably what you were, the point you were making. And that is definitely a disadvantage. Okay, so we talked about containers and all the benefits and some disadvantages. Can anybody name some containers that you've used, or some ideas that you've had, or things that you've seen maybe in other people's gardens? My grandma reused everything that she had, and she would grow in water bottles and old pop bottles and start seeds and like butter containers, and she'd have them like all over. One of the things that she did a long time ago is, I don't know who did it, somebody did it for her, but turned old tires into planters, and she had those all over her yard. I don't know if that is the recommendation now to use old tires, but that's what she did in the 80s.
Yeah.
I know I haven't done it, but I've seen them do them in some bags, like growing potatoes or whatever in the bags.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of maybe like those laundry bags or any type of cloth bag or something. They've been growing potatoes and those type of things.
Yep. Yeah,
Nice.
laundry bags are definitely on the list. And you want something that will drain well.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's definitely something, that you can do. You can grow potatoes and all kinds of things. I made a bin out of just like chicken wire or, metal mesh kind of material, and just made like a cylinder out of it and put some like weed fabric on the bottom and filled it with soil. And we got potatoes that year. That was pretty fun. So the basic rule with container gardening is if you can put soil in it, you can use it to grow food. I did mention about drainage, so you want to make sure that it has really good drainage. And if it doesn't, using like a power drill to drill holes on the bottom is a super easy fix. Or if not, a power drill, something that will pierce it. And then, you want to always make sure that whatever container you're using, it's going in a place that allows like free drainage. So putting it on, something that's going to block those holes is not ideal. And definitely, be really aware of what containers you're using, what containers, what they were used for before you got to them. Some will have really toxic chemicals and things that are super harmful to plants and humans, and you wouldn't want that getting leached into your food. So be super aware of that. Can you all think of containers you shouldn't use?
Maybe pots with paint on them, like if it got certain kind of paint on it.
Yep. That's a good one for sure.
Old bleach containers, cleaning supplies.
Yep. Yep. I wouldn't reuse those at all.
In the chat, there's tires, which is, like you had mentioned, maybe questionable. Gas cans.
Ooh.
Yeah. Big one. Big one. All right. So here's a really great list. Definitely not inclusive or exclusive, but 5-gallon buckets, those are probably the easiest and the most accessible if if you can afford that, or if you have, a hookup on empty buckets. Clay pots, those are always around. Old black landscape pots, healthy cloth pots, old boots, you know, depending on what kind of life those boots lived, I guess. Old drawers, like drawers in a what do you call those things? A dresser, not like the pants that you wear. Laundry bags, someone said that. Crates with some kind of liner. Yeah, definitely depending on the crates, like a milk crate, you would want to definitely line that with something just to help conserve the soil. Barrels, planter boxes, water bottles. What else can you guys think of that would make a good container for a garden?
I just got some containers. They're felted cloth containers, but they have a flap that comes up so that I can get the potato when they come up, so I can take the potatoes out very easily.
Oh, nice.
I haven't done it before, but so this is an experiment.
Nice.
You'll have to report back.
Oh, will do.
What else? Did we have any in the chat?
That's it for so far.
Okay. Yeah, pickle buckets for sure. But then everything smells like pickles. If you're into that sort of thing. Some people like pickles.
Well, you can do cucumbers with the pickle buckets.
There you go. All right. Here are some really great examples of reusable and recycled bags and containers. Yeah, everybody has probably a ton of these like old shopping bags, reusable shopping bags. I never seem to keep those in my car, so those would probably come in handy here in my yard. Old sacks here. That one looks like old kitty litter containers. Those are handy. More pictures here. Oh, there's pictures of old boots, old aluminum cans. That's a really great idea for like a herb garden. 5-gallon buckets, laundry baskets. Oops. And so lots of ways to get creative. And this is like such a really great way to like reuse and recycle things around your house. Which I think Detroit growers are really great in this department. I've seen some really creative things. I'm sure, Keto, you can probably agree.
Yeah, for sure. And I think noting the one in the middle here is, also kind of, it's a functionally, we could add to the benefits list functionally, like for accessibility, you could have the pots on a raised surface. Folks don't need to bend down, or if somebody's in a wheelchair, they can access the pots easier than they would an in-ground bed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. Is that an actual picture that you took, or is that something that we know?
No, that was a Google Images steal.
That's really cool. All right, moving on. So many, many, many different container options. Oh, that one's got a old kiddie pool. And there's all the water bottles down on the bottom. So lots of great things, lots of endless possibilities. This picture is here with people growing carrots in a pot. That would be kind of cool. Especially at harvest time. That's got to be easy, harvesting carrots out of a container.
Yeah, much looser.
For sure. Yeah. Easier on the body too. So some container tricks. You can bucket inside bucket watering. What does that mean?
That's like you could do basically bottom watering. So you have the water in the bottom of and you stack a bucket inside of a bucket, and the bottom bucket, you can just have like overfill it, and then the reserve water will suck back into the bucket as the soil dries out. Kind of a wicking action.
Okay, that's cool. Moving the pots with the sunlight. So if you are living with a backyard that is super shady, I get a lot of that all the time. Like my yard is so shady, I can't grow anything in there. I can only grow in the certain spot. Having like containers that are easily, that you can move around, follow that sunlight depending on what you're growing. That would be a really good benefit. And put a heavier large pot on a dolly to move it around. That's super smart. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about some plant requirements, because not all plants are created equal and not all containers are created equal. So at least 4 to 8 inches deep based on the roots needs of each plant. So you have to know what kind of plants you're going to want to grow, so you can pick the right container for them. You want to have really good drainage and water and airflow in the soil, so roots can breathe and not develop a root rot. So that, again, like if you have something that's not breathable, like a 5-gallon bucket, adding some drainage holes, is super ideal. It's definitely what you're not going to want to, especially if you're going to grow, well, really anything. Access to adequate light, we talked about that. Fertility, so compost, worm castings, fish emulsion, things to boost up that soil to give it all the nutrients that it needs. You want to make sure that you're inspecting your plants regularly to check for disease. That's just a given, no matter where you're growing, whether you're growing in the ground or in a container. You want to pay attention to that kind of stuff. So any questions on that before we move on to the next little bit?
Yeah, real quick. Were you saying, like, is it 4 to 8 inches deep for the whole pot, or 4 to 8 inches up under wherever, like the plant at?
Yeah, so 4 to 8 inches deep for the plant, for the container, depending on the plant that you're growing. So if you're growing, I don't know. If you want to grow carrots, you wouldn't want to grow a carrot in like a small clay pot. You would want something much deeper to grow those carrots in. And depending on that, it's kind of, 4 to 8 inches deep is the container size, is what we're talking about.
I have a question. Okay,
Yeah.
so would that be the maximum for 4 to 8 inches, or how would you know what plant would need more space other than 8 inches?
Keto, do you have a thought on that one?
Well, we're going to talk specifically about a bunch of the different, we're going to get into like the root depths of some of the plants and what to consider for each of them in specific a little bit later in the presentation.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. Okay, perfect.
There was a question here. What is worm castings and fish emulsion?
Good questions. So worm castings is exactly what you think, or maybe not. Worm castings is like the outer shell of the worm's body that is that right?
No,
That's right.
it's
No.
no, it's worm. It's basically worm poop. It's basically like worm manure.
Okay.
It's a form of fertilizer.
Okay.
Those were given as examples of organic fertilizers that you could use for boosting the soil nutrition.
Good. And fish emulsion.
Is a form of like fermented fish or like processed fish
Right.
intended for an organic fertilizer.
Great. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
All right. What are needs for successful containers? Again, pots that are large enough for intended planting. Good potting mix. So you want to look for a soil-less potting mix. We like such as Sunshine, that's a brand. And it usually contains peat moss and perlite. So like those little white little chunks in there. You want that soil to look super fluffy. You want to add good compost. A good general mix is like 50-50 potting mix and compost. You do not want to use topsoil or garden soil, so nothing like from like, you know, digging up in your yard and throwing it into a pot. You don't really want to do that unless you're really amending that with like peat moss and perlite and, you know, compost and things like that. But you can achieve, you know, a good potting mix just by, you know, buying something that like a potting mix.
Most hardware stores carry them these days, or
Mhm.
big box stores, but there's a lot of options,
Yeah.
or the grow shops.
You want to have enough water. That's key. You know, plants grown in containers need frequent watering because they will dry out fast. So if you are, you know, planning on that, make sure you have a good water source and have a good plan to, you know, make sure you're getting their water in every day. And then fertility, containers would do best if fertilized a few times during the season. You can add compost, organic fertilizer for that general purpose. Does anybody have any questions about those specifically?
Yes. So
Mhm.
so well, I'll start with this one. Can we put regular city dirt on the bottom to fill and then compost on top? You want to take that one, or you want me to take that one?
Go ahead.
So I would not, if you know, there are situations where you have really deep pots and you like, if you want to just kind of fill up space, I would be more inclined to use something that's going to act good for drainage. So like we talked about having 4 to 8 inches of soil for the plants to grow in, and or even deeper, 10 or 12 would be great, especially with some of these things. The more soil mass, the more water retention, the less often you're going to have to water. But so like if you want to do some drainage at the bottom, you know, putting some rocks down there, or even crushing up old plastic cell packs from your transplants from you know, those plastic 6-packs and 4-packs, and just lining the bottom with those and then putting your soil on top. So that is maybe a better strategy. The downside to using garden soil is that it just tends to compact in smaller spaces, you know, and it could like kind of harden and be an issue with drainage. So that would be my, you know, could you get away with it? Do people still do it and have some varying levels of success? Yes. I think you're gonna have a little bit, and maybe, with the combination of the potting mix and the garden soil won't be so bad because you'll have the drainage of the peat moss and the perlite and all those things that are in the potting mix. So, so that's some thoughts about that. And then, can one put too much water in a container? In the container?
I mean, I would think yes, especially if you don't have good drainage.
Yeah, I mean, and the other concern there would be if you're overwatering, you could be leaching off nutrients. So it's just like all that water's draining out and through. You just need to fully saturate the pots. If water starts draining out the bottoms, then you're done.
Mhm. That's definitely a good rule of thumb. If it's like already like just leaking out on the bottom. Do we have other
Okay, and then
questions?
Asia, maybe we can save. I'm gonna save your question till the end to talk about like disease concerns.
Perfect. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, so we're gonna move forward. Oh yeah, and then sun, at least 8 hours of sunlight for your plants. So we're gonna get into some specifics around crops that do well in containers and crops that don't do well. So all greens, on all greens mix like lettuce, different lettuce mixes and greens and things like that. Arugula, lettuce, mustard greens. Those are all really easy too, because depending on those varieties that you're growing, if you're not growing a lettuce head, and you can just keep harvesting, and it's really easy if you've got a counter space and sunlight, you can have that right in your kitchen and harvest your greens as you go. I'm not quite there yet. I would love to be that kind of person that has greens on our counter. I'm just not there. Bush beans and radishes. Radishes are root, our root crop, but their roots are little, so you don't need a super deep container for radishes. Spinach, cilantro, oregano. I think just about any herb does really well in a container, and really great, zinnias and marigolds, different flowers. I think all flowers do really great in containers. These are all shallow rooted crops.
Right, so that's something to really emphasize, and when you're thinking about growing stuff in containers, is kind of having a sense of how big or how deep the roots go. So we tried to break that out for you. So these are, clearly all the ones on this sheet are like shallow rooted. So they're going to be probably among the better performers in pots generally. Like they'll tend to really thrive in container environments.
I have a question. So turnip greens and collard greens will not grow well in containers?
That's not true. We'll get it. We're gonna get to those. Or not sure if turnip greens is specifically on there, but we'll come for full circle to that if we didn't address it by the time we go through the next couple slides.
Okay.
All right. So these are deep rooted crops. These need at least 10-inch deep pots for these plants. So parsnips, beets, carrots, turnips, rutabagas, potatoes, sweet potatoes, leeks, and onions. So all of these, if you've grown any of these, or if you're familiar with any of these, all of these, this fruit grows in the ground. It's the root crop. So that's what you really need. Need a lot of space for those. Any questions about these deep-rooted crops? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to keep going. Okay, so this next list are group crops that need lots of space. At least a 3-gallon pot for one plant. So a 5-gallon bucket would be really ideal. Or, those huge, huge ceramic or clay pots. We can just go through the list really quick. I'm not going to name them all because it's quite a list, but I did mention I've grown tomatoes in buckets before. They did okay. They probably, I have more success with tomatoes grown in the ground. But in a pinch, when you want tomatoes and you don't have access to a ground, they will thrive in a bucket. Broccoli, Brussels sprouts, these are all over your cold crops, all of your, your hardy brassicas. But they do need a lot of space to grow and be prepared for that. And then your vining plants like your watermelon, and your summer squash and your zucchini, you want to grow, those will grow really well in the pot, but you want to be aware of, that those spread all over the place. Same way if you're going to do beans, pole beans too. I've done those in buckets and those do well, but you want to have a space that they can kind of spread out in. Eggplants and peppers and tomatoes, all in the nightshade family. Those do really well in pots, as long as they're big enough for them. And then, your Swiss chard and your fennel and okra, and zucchini and kohlrabi, all really good crops that need lots of space. Any questions on those?
What is that last one? Kohlrabi, what is that?
What is kohlrabi? Yeah. Go ahead.
So how do we describe a kohlrabi? To me, kohlrabi is, it's not a root crop, but it's in the brassica family, right?
Yeah, it's
July is Lamar's birthday, Zayden.
it's essentially like a swollen stem. So it's in taste and in texture, it's somewhere between the crunch and size of an apple. Like, if you ever eaten like a fresh broccoli stem that isn't tough, like it's crunchy and tastes good, just imagine that in the shape of a ball, that with a nice skin on the outside. So it tastes very like similar to something like broccoli, the stem of a broccoli, but it's larger, so you can use it for making like coleslaw or things like that.
Yeah. I've described it like as if like a cabbage didn't have layers. That's what it would taste like to me. All right, so moving on. Oops. Okay, and then we did talk a little bit about vining crops in the previous slide, but these definitely need much a bigger space, a 5-gallon pot or bigger. And these just because they have, they're vining and they will have pretty big roots as well. So your squash, your winter squash varieties and your pole bean varieties, anything in the squash family is definitely going to need a bigger space. Peas, but you can put more than one plant in a container, which is really great. And then your watermelon and your cantaloupe. So any questions on these vining crops? Okay. Okay. Reading the chat.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yeah.
You had ground cherries. Somebody gave me a plant. Is it really a cherry? I was going to look it up to see if it was a cherry. I don't know what it was.
Good question. Keto, how would you describe a ground cherry?
They're related to tomatoes. and tomatillos, if you're familiar with tomatillos, but they taste unique and different. So they're about the size of a cherry with a little thin papery husk on the outside. They're called ground cherries because they kind of trail when they grow, they kind of trail on the ground and they tend to fall off the vine when they're ripe, but that's okay because they have that nice packaging on them. You just peel that back and inside, they're usually a golden color when they're ripe. So if they're slightly green, that might be a little tart, but when they're really golden, they're kind of sweet and nutty. My daughter loves them. So I think they're popular with the kids. They're definitely a unique flavor and something worth trying for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I made a habanero and ground cherry jam a couple years ago with the ground
nice.
cherries that I had, and that was really good. Ground cherries are my favorite, and it's my favorite to watch people eat them for the first time because you don't know how to explain what that tastes like. It's really good, but you can also eat too many and get sick, so be aware of that.
I have a picture of it if you want to see it.
Sure.
I don't know how you can get me on the camera.
Camera on.
I don't know. I think we maybe it's not so easy to do. I think we should maybe
Okay.
pull that to the
You can send it to Keto. All right. Oops. Okay. So this is a good question. How many plants can fit in a pot? So depending on the size of pots and depending on your plant, is this like a quiz that we're asking people?
Yes.
Okay, so how many plants, if we're growing a cucumber plant, how many plants would fit in a 6-inch pot?
2.
2? Any other guesses?
One?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say.
Yeah, I'd say 1 also.
Yep.
I hear you.
What if you had a 24-inch pot? Could you fit more than one cucumber plant in there?
Can you put a couple in if you use a trellis, a little trellis?
Maybe 4.
3? Because you do put a trellis in with the cucumbers, right? A little one.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, you could if you wanted them to, grow up along something.
I have a question. So, okay, so what if you plant that one plant? Well, if you start with seeds, you do that one seed and it really don't come up. So if you start with seeds, when you want to put like 2 in there, so just in case one don't come up, the other one would.
Yeah, that's usually that's definitely something that is a normal practice, especially if you don't know that germination rate of that seed. Putting, more than, 2 seeds is probably a good a good way to cover your bases. What do you think, Keto?
Yeah, if you're starting stuff from seed, like if you're doing direct seeding into, like say you were doing cucumbers directly into these pots, then yeah, doing 2 or 3 seeds with ultimately like after they germinate, you're going to cut them down to 1.
Mhm.
I think that, I think one of the ideas to really drive home here, and this is like, I definitely have had some good practical experience with this too, is to think about or reference your garden resource program planting instructions or the seed packet instructions on spacing. And so and the other part of that is like, you don't, like say it said 24 inches. Well, if you have a 24-inch pot, that's edge to edge. You can't really plant a seed on the edge of a pot. So you can sometimes squeeze more than that inside a plant, but generally speaking, I would say tending towards less plants per pot, like even for larger pots, for the bigger things, like if you're growing a tomato, one tomato in a pot. If you're growing a cucumber, one, maybe two in a pot. If you're growing lettuces or some of the shallow rooted things that we were talking about in that slide from before, then you can play around with trying to get them a little bit closer. The other factor here is the fertility. Like, so if you're trying to pack more in, think about fertilizing more often.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like reading your seed packages too, like getting really familiar with that information and how to read a seed packet I think is really good too.
Like I remember I was thinking, when I first tried to play around with container gardens, and I had this tiny backyard at my old apartment, and we just had these 1 and 2 gallon pots. So a pot, not much bigger than this. And I planted collards in it, or kale in them. And it seemed reasonable, but they just got to a certain size and then they just kind of stopped. They get to the teenager size and they get stunted. And that's kind of referring to what we were talking about earlier, is that, the limitations of the root space. Zarina is saying, yes, I learned that last year. I had one pot with like 8 basil plants, but the pot with just 1 basil plant produced way more basil, which is a perfect example. Thank you for sharing.
Yep. Good, thank you. All right, we're gonna keep moving forward. So overwintering pots. And basically what that means is, you're keeping, you're gonna reuse your potting soil, empty containers and mix soil with shredded leaves in a bin or garbage can, or in a pile if you have a space in your yard for that. You want to clean and store your pots, remove soil from clay pots or fragile pots so things don't expand and break.
Yeah, so you can definitely recycle that potting soil from year to year, whether that's, and then incorporating either shredded leaves, or you could, reincorporate compost year after year.
Yeah.
Some people were, doing high value crops, don't, like the marijuana industry, like they throw away their old soil, but for these purposes, you can definitely reuse that stuff.
Yeah. So when I hear overwintering, I go to like leaving, if you're growing mint in a pot, you wouldn't necessarily take that out and like toss it, right? You would leave it in your pot over the winter, right?
Oh, right. Yeah. So that's, yeah. And so if it is a perennial thing, if it is a perennial thing, then you could, the concern is if it basically, perennials have the benefit of that are in the ground, perennials that are in the ground have the benefit of the soil around them, keeping the thermal mass of the soil, like helping the plant survive the winter. And if they don't have that protection of through, kind of the intense colds of the winter, they could die off. So one kind of patch for that would be, if you have the option, either to bury the pots or to pack all the pots together after everything's kind of died back for the fall, pack them in a corner and put some bagged leaves around them, or pack some leaves around them and cover them up to give them a little bit of insulation.
Cool. Thank you.
So the question, why does the weed industry toss out their soil? I don't know a ton about it, but my understanding is that they're just trying to minimize risk. And so if they're reusing soil, they don't want to reintroduce any kind of contaminants that could, you know, they're growing lots and lots and lots of plants. And so, and each plant represent, you know, that it's just it's a risk because of the, you know, the length of time that it takes to grow out plants. So they just start fresh each time because they can afford to, and it minimizes the risk.
Do people ever reuse that soil for like repurpose it for anything else? Like they're not like throwing it in the garbage. Are they like throwing it in compost or something?
Well, I think a lot of those those, especially the big companies, are definitely just throwing it in the dumpster.
Wow.
I mean, some of those, they just get super pot bound too. So that's another thing to contend with. But yeah, I mean, there's some efforts to get some good recycling practices here in the city. And so that would be a really good contribution to those composting facilities.
Interesting. Cool. Good questions. Okay, so some common mistakes that happen in container gardening. Sometimes you use the wrong soil, or you're using garden soil instead of potting mix. And we did talk a bit about that already. Overwatering or underwatering, and then too many plants in a pot. So 3 top ones that we've talked a bunch about already.
Yeah, and let's see. Yeah, space is, I think, the biggest one. That and I guess adding and staying on top of fertility, I think, is another one that we didn't write down here.
Cool. Okay. All right. So we are at the end of our slides, and now we can have some questions and kind of open the floor for any comments or anything that's still burning.
I have a question.
Go for it.
So, will you guys be hosting a class like this on how to detect and know what certain diseases are that your plants might get? Say, for instance, I do have peppermints and spearmint growing in my backyard. And I noticed, like, when it rained a certain amount, that it'd be like black spots on the leaves of my peppermint. So I was just curious, are you going to have like a course on that?
Well, we don't have one specifically designated for diseases on the horizon. We do have a class coming up on weed management and weed identification. So weed identification and management, like garden weed identification management. And we so we don't have something specific to diseases on the horizon, but in any case that you have, if you do have, you know, issue that you're trying to figure out, if you want to take a picture of it, I'll drop my email in the chat and I can help you navigate that.
Are there some examples you can kind of give based on your experience?
Well, I would say there are diseases out there. There's not really, with vegetables, there's not a ton. So a few examples. So let me just try and address a few of the common ones. And actually, Rosebud, would you come off of
Yeah,
screen share, and I will try and pull up some pictures.
sure.
So the first one I'll mention is powdery mildew. And that one is, oh no, here, let me do a screen share now. You guys see that?
Yep, we can see it.
Yeah, okay, so powdery mildew is really common on things in the cucumber family. So that's lots of times, generally speaking, lots of times diseases and pests attack things in specific families. So One family is the curcubits or the cucumber family, which includes squashes and melons and zucchini and summer squash. And one common one for those crops is powdery mildew. And it's one that it can be in various stages of seriousness or problem. It's hard to avoid because we don't always have control of the rain, and we can't control Mother Nature. And if it rains at night, it provides, rain at night provides kind of a favorable environment because it's cool and dark and humid, and these things just live naturally in our environment. There are a few different remedies, including using milk, or just part of it is trying to catch it early on. If you see it starting to develop, you can remove some of the diseased leaves. I've also heard, people using a dilution of baking soda as a spray. So that's one. Another one is blossom end rot. And this is it's more of a environmental or gardening practice disease that comes about, and it's related to what's the mineral? Calcium. It's related to a calcium deficiency. But it's kind of directly correlated to watering and inconsistent watering. So basically the water, if you're not watering consistent enough, or the plants get too dried out, they are prone to blossom end rot because the plant is not taking up enough calcium through, because it takes up nutrients through the movement of water, and that pulls through the plant. Those are two real common ones. I mean, the fact of the matter is that whether it be a pest or a disease or a weed, these are things that are going to happen to us from time to time. And you can't there's not always preventative measures. The best defenses of a healthy garden, or the best kind of methodology of a healthy garden, or a garden that is less prone to pests and diseases, is just covering all the bases of what plants need to survive and thrive. And so that's the access to adequate sunlight, at least 8 hours of sunlight, consistent watering, not letting the soil dry out too much, addressing fertility, not having the plants too close together, not having too much weed pressure or competition from weeds, and then so that's the baseline. Okay, so let's go back to the questions here in the chat.
I have a question.
Yes, go for it.
Okay. I had this from a couple of years ago. It's called Ortho Insect Mite and Disease 3-in-1. And I didn't know whether, is that good for the, it says it's good for flowers, ornamentals, fruits and vegetables, but is it good for fruits and vegetables? And if I spray it on to some other parts of the garden, will the insects go to my fruits and vegetables where it's not sprayed on them? Or should I leave it alone and do something else?
Right. So I don't know specifically that product, but I do know that Ortho is more of like a chemical company. It's not basically the difference is when you're looking at organic approaches, they tend to be not harsh and not as intense, and maybe less problematic if you possibly ingest them.
Okay.
So, and I also want to make a statement that I would not recommend spraying anything if you don't know what the problem is. So first you need to prophylactic spraying of things, as a protective measure before you know what a problem is is probably gonna just be wasting the product and wasting your money and your time.
Okay.
So more of like and so proactively you should be, I mean, there are some proactive things. I don't want to totally turn that off, but like, I think instead of, generally I would more recommend the approach of, trying to really focus on those things. Like I had just mentioned, that list of things that keep your plants healthy and thriving. And then when you start to see any kind of problem, identify what the problem is and try and figure, and then either, or you can contact us and we can help get with recommendations specifically based on what you're dealing with. So identify, I have aphid problems. I have,
something is eating though. I went on vacation for a week and when I came back, a lot of the leaves, all of the leaves had holes in them.
right.
So,
Right. Right. So, and that's probably on your collards and kale, is that right?
yes, yeah.
Right.
Flea beetles.
Right. So there's two common pests for things and that's another family we're talking about here, which would be the Brassica family. And we talked a little bit about them earlier when Rosebud was going down the list of things that were related when we were talking about what fits in specific size pots. But essentially, things in the Brassica family are dealing with actually three pests. There's flea beetles, which are a tiny beetle that makes like tiny holes in the leaves that look kind of like buckshot. And let's pull up an image here. And then the other one would be cabbage loopers, which they're like the caterpillar form of them. They're the white butterflies you see around your garden.
Yeah, the white butterflies. Yeah.
And so we're concerned about their the larval stage, the caterpillar stage, which when they're munching on the leaves. This is some examples of what. Let me do flea beetles on. Oh, these aren't great images of the flea beetle damage.
They just eat up the plant.
Oh, it's so funny. I wrote Beatles like as in the band Beatles. That's why. So yeah, these images are not great. But anyways, this is some of the examples of what flea beetle damage might look like. And then and this is what a cabbage looper looks like.
Okay.
But
is there any time of day
oh
that
yeah,
they
this
come
one
out?
right here, this image right here is a good example of cabbage looper and the damage they do.
Is there any time of day that they come out the most?
Well, they'll always go there oftentimes is a plant in your garden that's a runt. So if you get a six pack of collards, 5 of them do great. And one of them will be like a runt, and that'll be the weak plant that tends to take on the more of the pest pressure. It depends. It really, like, yes, in your garden, which is probably different than my garden, some plants seem to like get more damage quicker than others. Like, I have noticed that sometimes mustard greens seem to get hit harder than collards. So, in some situations with flea beetles. So let me just take a quick second to talk about the treatment of those things and we can move on. So flea beetles are tricky because they're a hard-bodied insect and they kind of have resistance to any kind of sprays. Some people have talked about something called diatomaceous earth, which is like basically looks like white powder, but it's microscopic skeletons of sea creatures, and it tends to cut up pest, like it's used as a pest control because it if it's ingested or if they walk across it, it causes damage to their bodies. Limited moderate success people have with that. They also don't like to be agitated, so if you put right when you plant them, right when you plant your plants, you could put row cover over them loosely, and when it flaps in the wind, that agitates them and you know, gets them to jump off. Crop rotation, or not planting not planting things in the same spot every year, is also a good measure, because they tend to overwinter in the soil. So those are some for that. Cabbage loopers, if you see the white butterflies in your garden, you probably have some form of them. So you want to inspect the whole plant, and you're looking for the little green worms or little green caterpillars and squishing them. Also look for the eggs. There's usually like a bunch of egg sacs, you know, like standing up on end,
Okay,
on the undersides of leaves.
all right.
All right, so we're going back to the list here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Ezra was talking about ants tearing up your broccoli leaves. Okay, I don't know that. I've never experienced that, but if you want, but that was more of a comment than a question. So Diana's talking about ladybugs, which is true, and so that's something to think about. Okay, how are we doing on questions? You guys have questions?
Yeah, I have a question about woodchuck Chucky, because I keep seeing him in my backyard and I see him around my containers. And what do I need to put down so he'll go away forever? I put some ammonia down, but that didn't seem to work. So what
Yeah.
else can I put
down? Chucky is, you know, he likes the taste of your plants.
It means you have a healthy garden.
Yeah, for
If
sure.
that's any consolation.
Yeah,
but
it's in on any of these rosebuds,
not mine.
so you probably, a couple things. You want to get a sense of where they're coming from. Sometimes it's a family. And so usually you're looking for the hole. You know, they have a roughly 3 or 4 inch diameter hole that they dig in the ground as for a home. So you want to identify that and maybe fill it in. You know, repellents have some degree of work. There's a couple of repellents that are specifically for all kinds of mammals, include like the one that I've heard people talk about a lot is called Plant Skid. I'm going to write that in the chat because it's kind of a weird spelling. And I think that's made from coyote urine or something. So it's like it's a predator. The scent of a predator's, you know, body odors deters them. So it's something that you have to reapply every time it rains. For more kind of immediate results, probably looking into a live trap is going to be a more, you know, maybe a better approach. And that a live trap is like basically a little cage that you put some bait in, and when they go inside, the gate closes, and then you need to take that animal to another, you know, miles away and release them in a park or something, or you know, just decide if you want to just dispatch them.
A really nice way of saying that.
Yeah. I've never tasted groundhog, but maybe it's a thing, you know.
I mean, if it's eating good. There is a comment in here in the chat. What about the use of allium vegetables? The smell of the strong smell scent,
Yeah.
as like a defense mechanism. And that's like one thing that I've always been taught is like, well, first of all, we're in their environment. We're the pests to them, because they live in nature. We're in their house. So that's one thing to think about. And then one thing that I was always taught is to like grow extra for them. And then to like, as like a perimeter, to grow like, you know, onions and garlic and like chives, and something that's like really aromatic that will kind of keeps those pests away. And that tends to work. sometimes.
Yeah. I mean,
Ground.
it's
ground
worth
chuck
trying.
is
It's a low risk.
Mhm.
Other things with mammals to play around with are there's like those there's motion activated sprinklers, or things that like most, you know, most squirrels and rodents and such like are skittish and deterred or scared away by movement. And so like things that move in the wind, like old CDs, or, you know, if anybody has old CDs anymore, or you know, people used to talk about using old AOL discs that you got in the mail. But there's things like you can purchase like flash tape, which is basically like a silvery shiny tape that blows very easily in the wind, and it, you know, disturbs things, you know, especially, you know, animals that are really skittish like birds.
Can I make a comment? Now, if you having a rodent problem, you plant peppermints. Rodents don't like the smell of peppermints. If you having a squirrel problem, you can put some mothballs and some paprika in like a plastic container with holes in it, whatever, with a top. And you could tie it maybe on your fence or wherever your plants are. They don't like the smell of that, the squirrels. So
Okay.
yeah,
Right on.
that's why I'm telling you, it's good to have peppermint on your garden.
Yeah, and I guess that also makes me think that like having it just the, you know, the concept or the bigger picture of creating biodiversity in your, even if you have a small space that you're growing in, like a variety of things, a little bit extra, like Rosebud had mentioned, having some things of different smells and odors and sizes and shapes, like, you know, variety also creates an atmosphere, especially with some of the insects and flowering things, will attract beneficial insects to deal with some of the, you know, pest insects. So that's another thing, is like having flowers that flower at different times in the period and attract beneficial insects is another strategy for dealing with some of the pests, not the mammals so much as, but the insects. Okay, other questions, thoughts, comments, tips you want to share?
Well, Keto, it's Marguerite. Our last session with Finnegan's Farms or something like that, she covered all those wonderful slides with all sorts of pests.
Yes.
Remember? Yeah, so that's a good video. Joya, you should watch that video.
Yeah, so thanks for bringing that up, Marguerite. There, we have a YouTube channel, Keep Growing Detroit, and we got a bunch of videos. So we post, you know, all the virtual classes we post. So definitely check that out when you get a chance. Sarah Grant is asking, are wasps useful to y'all? I think they are misunderstood. Yeah, well, I think in the natural world, they serve a purpose. Are they annoying to humans? They can be, especially at the end of the season when they are trying to make their last ditch effort, you know, for survival before, you know, late in the summer. That's when they seem to be really a challenge. They do play a role in pollination. They do kind of play a role in feasting on other insects, and so they're kind of part of the food web. So I think that's a valid statement there, Sarah. Okay, questions, other questions? Wow, Rosebud, you like disappeared and then you reappeared. It was like there was a glitch and like you were a ghost for a second.
Sorry.
Okay, any other questions, thoughts, comments, tips you want to share? Okay. Well, if not,
I got a question.
okay.
Is it better to water in the morning or in the evening?
It is always more ideal to water in the morning because it gives some time before the heat, and this particularly applies for when it's really hot. Like when it's in the springtime, it's less of a factor. But and if you gotta water and evening is the only time you have to water, then water in the evening. But all that said, watering in the morning is the preferred time because the plants have time to soak that water up before the heat of the sun, starts beating down on them. So they get some more some reserves. Whereas in the evening, the risk with the later in the evening is that, that any kind of moisture that's left on the plants, and this is only for some specific plants. So like we were talking about the cucurbits earlier, the cucumbers and collards, or I'm sorry, cucumbers and squashes and things in the cucumber family are prone to powdery mildew, which is a fungus that is, has a favorable, the favorable environment is when it's cold, dark, and damp. So yeah, morning is better. Evening is not terrible if that's the best option, but if you had a choice, do it in the morning. Okay.
In like the middle of the day, right? When it's super hot, you don't really want to.
Right. You're just, and again, if it's the middle of the day, right, it's just not as efficient. Yeah, I mean, if that's the only time you got, then that's the time you should water. But if it's the morning is going to be the most ideal. Okay, Alexis's question here is chicken wire good to get for raccoons and woodchucks to keep them away? So if you're gonna do chicken wire or any kind of wire fencing around your garden, specifically to address woodchucks or things that are burrowing animals, then you need to bury it at least 12 inches below. So basically dig a trench around the garden and then put the fence down in there and then fill it in. Chicken wire might be a little bit light duty. You might want something a little bit more thicker in gauge. Like you can get thicker, but chicken wire can be, so you got to kind of look out there for some products that are available, but or you could do another way. It would be like to bury possibly a piece of wood that the wire is attached to, so that acts as that 12-inch barrier, but that's going to rot in time. So that's a few thoughts on that. Okay, next question from Tish. If you're using a really large planter pot, then what is the ration of layering, sand, mulch, etc., soil, etc.? Okay, if you've got a really large planter pot, you're just wanting to make sure that the top 12 inches, to be safe, is the compost potting mix. And then below that, you can do sand, you can do rocks, you can do crushed up cell packs. It's just filler below that's really necessary. Like you don't need to have that whole thing full of soil because the roots aren't going to go down that far. So, and then, mulch is always a great option for the top for water retention.
So what if you're planting a fruit tree, like you want to do a lemon tree for the outside? Are their roots going to go deep or?
I would not recommend. I mean, if it's a dwarf, maybe if it's a dwarf lemon, those are kind of like, I would call more like pet project type plants. Like I think that it's challenging to try and grow a lemon tree to actually get lemons. I know you can, harvest the leaves and use the leaves for, especially for like Meyer lemons. People use those for cooking, or there's other kinds of lemons and limes that they specifically use the leaves for. But if you're really trying to get fruit, I think that's going to be a challenge because they require a longer season, and unless you have a heated greenhouse, not just a hoop house, but a heated greenhouse, they're going to be limited on the amount of light that they're going to be able to take in. But that said, and like generally speaking, I would not recommend trees for pots because of what we were talking about before, where of the, of the roots and needing that thermal mass of the soil. So like you can't do an apple tree in a pot. Like an apple tree ultimately is going to get huge. I'm not that familiar with lemon trees, but I know that they get to a full lemon tree is going to get at least 6 feet in diameter. So you got to have a super big pot and you got to be able to move that inside and outside. So that, tropical things are going to be really finicky to try and grow in our climate.
I had a lemon tree, Myers lemon tree, the small one. And I put it outside and the squirrels ate the lemons. So I didn't get any of them.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, totally. Okay. Sarah is saying, do you ever consider growing Irish lumpers? They are a type of potato famous for being involved in the famine in Ireland. Have not. I don't have any experience with those. Do you? Okay.
In my like quick little Google search, it looks like, there's definitely an effort to bring that seed back, and start regrowing those, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, there's thousands of varieties of potatoes. Like it's cool all those different varieties to play around.
Yeah, and I definitely don't know enough about the potato famine, so I would love to hear more.
I got a question about planting potatoes. Do you plant the whole potato with the eye, or do you cut the eye off and plant it into the soil?
You can do both. You can either plant the whole potato or you can cut it into like 1 or 2 inch sections, making sure there's an eye on each piece and then make sure the eye is facing upwards. Yeah. Usually people will cut the potato and then let it dry, let the cut part dry out a little bit, maybe for like a day, and then plant it to help to try and minimize disease.
Yeah, I've only ever planted like the whole potatoes, but we were planting like a field of potatoes.
Okay, yeah, just to review, just to make sure everybody knows, we are recording this and it'll be on our YouTube channel, and we will be sharing the slides with everybody who registered. Okay, so Diana's asking about what can be planted in water bottles. So yeah, so like if for any of those smaller containers, little cute fun things to play around with, that's going to be that first list. The shallow rooted things are going to really be the ones that are going to work the best in that scenario. So everything like lettuce, herbs, like we were talking about, spinach, different kinds of greens, that kind of stuff. Not the like big leaf greens like collards and kale, but like like the baby leaf salad greens or the Asian greens mix, those kinds of things.
And water bottles are really great to start season, right? Like even if
yes, thanks. Yeah, so it could be like that's part of your transplant growing, is starting some of these things in the water bottle with the intention of planting them out into bigger pots later on or in the ground later on.
Yeah.
Okay, so question about tomatoes from Garnetta. Is it true that you should pick off the bottom leaves of the tomato plant? Yeah, you don't have to. Usually one strategy that people will use is to strip the lower leaves, like the bottom 6 inches of leaves, and actually bury the plant almost up to the next set of leaves. So you're burying part of the stems. This is kind of a unique thing about tomatoes, is that they will actually grow roots off of the stem. So the deeper the plant is in the ground, the more roots that can develop, and the kind of more access to water and nutrients that the plant has, and it gives it a slight upper hand. Okay. So more questions, comments, tips that you got? Okay. I think if no more questions, then I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up for the day. Thanks for coming out and being with us today, guys. I do want to mention we got some classes coming up, including some in-person classes. Yay! So we got a class on weed identification and management next week, Thursday, I believe. Is that right? Week from today. So yes.
Hey, Keto.
Yes.
This is Catherine. Can I ask a completely unrelated question?
Yes.
Well, it's related to gardening.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Just don't ask me about.
huh?
Go ahead. I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Over the winter, my kale and my lettuce and my collard greens kept growing. And now everybody in my family is saying I need to just dig them up and throw them away and start fresh. But they look really good to me. They said they're going to be bitter.
No, they won't necessarily be bitter, but collards are biennial, which means that after one season, the next season they're gonna send up a flower head and go to seed, and then sometimes they will even. I've kept some that will even hang on after that. There are even some like cousins of collards and kale that are perennial. But all that to say is if you wanted to have fun and save some seeds, you could hold on to that plant and save the seeds from it. Or you could just, and I will say that actually the immature seed pods are kind of like a fun little bean. They taste good. But you can also just eat, like, don't let them taste them. I mean, you can taste them and have them taste them and be like, this is just collards. It doesn't taste bitter.
I'll make them something.
That is, but that is, all that said, like that is a common thing when, like, particularly with like lettuces, when they are starting to go to seed, that they will tend to be more bitter. So maybe that's kind of what they were thinking about, or along that analogy. But yeah, yeah. You could harvest or just harvest it, harvest all you can off of it, dig it out and start fresh. You'll probably get more production off of a new fresh plant from this year.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. I think last questions, final call. Okay. Thanks, Rosebud, for being out here with us today and sharing your skills and your knowledge. Thanks everybody for coming out and all the good questions. Like I said, we got a few classes coming up in person and a few other virtual ones. Stay tuned. And happy gardening, everybody.
Good. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Bye.